delighted to welcome Lars to our ITOM Insights podcast series. Lars Rossen is our Chief Technology Officer for Micro Focus. But Lars, you're a very busy guy. Can you give us some idea of all the other things that you're kind of involved in? Because you seem to be have your many hats. Yeah?
Yes, that's true, and part of it is also typically I've had many roles in the organization, so people keep asking me to do some of the old roles because I kind of was used to doing that as well. So one of my roles is I'm chief architect as well for the company. So really architecting how everything fits together, and that's natural because as a CTO and my office, the responsibility we have is to deliver thought leadership to our customers, but also making sure, and that's another one of my roles, is to drink our own champagne and drive that adaptation of our own technology. So the digital factory, that is a very important concept for us to be efficient in producing software. It's my responsibility to piece together a really efficient digital factory with as much use of our own product as possible. So that's another role I have in addition to the general thought leadership. And of course, working with all the various product groups in ensuring that what they do is aligned with the vision of the company. But then finally, very important to me is that we want to be an open company that drives the industry forward. So I'm very active in a standard organization called the Open Group, where I lead the work on the IT4IT standard, and I'm also the chairman of the board of the Open Group.
Right.
Because I do believe we need to contribute back to the community and not just have our own little closed system, if you will.
Perfect. And that's really one of the areas that we really wanted to cover in this podcast specifically. So I've come from a background of doing things like OpenView and Tivoli and CA Unicenter, and have really come from that sort of operations management side of things, mainly on the vendor side. But also how do you actually implement it? That brought in the whole thing around looking at ITIL. So I became ITIL certified back in the UK in its very early days, and I've followed that through all of the different versions. But now you mentioned the Open Group and IT4IT. So what I wanted to get from this conversation is, what do you see as the real differences between ITIL and IT4IT? But maybe you can just go into a bit of history about IT4IT and the Open Group and kind of where they came from.
Right. Yes, absolutely. So the Open Group goes way longer back than the IT4IT standard itself. It was originally formed around the Unix standard and is still stewards that standard, if you will. Might not be as relevant any longer in the modern world. We're all using Linux, but it steers a number of different standards, but everything around open interconnection of the world, digital systems, etc. And very importantly, with the Open Group it's a true standard organization in the sense that it's community peer-reviewed standards that gets published, and so. What we did was that about 10 years ago-ish, actually I started it back in 2008, where we looked at saying, well, in order to manage digital, you needed a lot of different products and processes and methods and tie them all together into something that was a solution for your development organization, for your operations organization, for your planning, etc. around digital. And every large organization had their own way of doing that, and the consultancy really loved it because they could spend years in designing the perfect solution. And so we teamed up with a couple of like-minded, in particular Shell. So at that time I was in HP, so HP and Shell, and we found another 5 companies to peer with: Achmea in Holland, Munich Re in Germany, AT&T, Accenture as a consultancy company, PricewaterhouseCoopers was there. And we sat down as a consortium and thought, well, is there a standardized way of actually managing digital? And you could say, well, isn't that ITIL, right? Well, the two things about ITIL is that ITIL is not a standard, it's a best practice, right? So somebody sat down and tried to say, this is how to work. And that practice in ITIL was focused on the process aspects primarily, not on the systems and architecture aspects. It's not an architecture. It's just a book that describes you should do these kind of things. You should manage the processes. You're laughing.
Well, I always look at ITIL and the 14 processes and things like that as it was at the time, and as I read it, it just seemed like common sense written down.
Yeah.
But with all of the bits interconnected between how you deal with incidents and how that links to change, but it's common sense.
Absolutely, and it's really common sense, and especially ITIL version 2 was a really good set of document and process. And I would say most organizations that delivers IT service management according to ITIL is fundamentally implementing version 2. When ITIL moved on to version 3, it was no longer a best practice document. It was a vision of some people that thought, well, why don't we do it this way? The CMDB should be a CMS, right? And there was a lot of writing about how you do problem management, etc. But I've seen very few, if any, company that has truly implemented everything in ITIL version 3.
I used to do lots of ITIL assessments, and so I've been into finance organizations, government, healthcare, manufacturing, and we used to assess all those 14 different areas and say, how well are you doing in this? And we'd ask the business as well as the IT group and kind of compare notes, and out of that we'd then have to create a plan. But often most companies really missed some of the key points. They were doing things like change management, but they had no CMDB. So they were really struggling. Well, what am I changing from, and how do I know I really changed to something? So lots of companies have struggled with ITIL. So whilst it's common sense kind of written down, it's been very difficult for people to implement.
Exactly right. And that was kind of the starting point for the IT4IT work, and saying we're not going to throw ITIL away. It's a good set of processes, a good thinking about what is common sense, right? Now, how are you going to do it? Well, you need these kind of systems. You need to manage these kind of data objects. These are how the data objects relate to each other. So we sat down and developed that architecture. And that was fun work, right? But then also when we did it, we already from day one, when we met the gang of 7, if you will, to do that, we agreed that this should be something that were not owned by anyone. It should be a standard, right? And we also knew that you're never going to finish this work. It have to constantly evolve, so it needs to be stewarded by an organization you could trust would care for it generally, right? And that's when we then said, well, Open Group seems to be the right home for this kind of thing. So we approached Open Group. They were very happy about bringing us in, and then we released it as a standard back in 2015-ish, right? We joined 2014 into Open Group. And since then, about 100 companies has joined in to co-develop the standard with us in the Open Group. And it's free for anyone to, go ahead.
Sorry, is that primarily vendors, or is that end user companies? I mean, you mentioned Shell. They obviously don't create operations management tools. They're an end user of that. So I assume those 100 companies is a real mix.
It's a real mix. So there are consumers in there. There are vendors like ourselves and some of our competitors, and that's fine. We encourage our competitors. We actually very actively went out and say, why don't you want to join to some of our competitors? Because we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just something that worked for Micro Focus, but actually works for any vendor. And we have many vendors in there. We also have consultancy companies saying, well, instead of you reinventing the wheel every time, why don't we create a common basis that you can do specialization out of? So Accenture was an example. DXC is in there. So it's really a mixture, right? There's also training institution that has joined in, and because somebody needs to teach and train it, and so they're members as well. So
from what I'm hearing, it sounds like you're suggesting that ITIL is that best practice document, but the IT4IT then creates that reference architecture that actually helps you build that out.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's so it creates the and if you truly understand architecture, then whenever you build something out, you need to have that enterprise architecture where you understand not only the people and process, but also the systems aspect, the data aspect, etc. You can compare it to what was done in the telco industry a couple of decades ago, called ETOM, which was the reference architecture for the telco industry, and there is a similar one for the banking industry, and now we have one for the IT industry itself, right?
Right. Okay.
And that we can use, and there was it really is useful. Now with any standards, it takes some time before people start really accepting it, if you will, right? But it's very important to also notice that now you have the starting point in ITIL, and that's a very important set of best practices, especially the version 2, if you will, right? For the operations people running stuff, right? But there is the agile movement going on. So you have agile frameworks like SAFe, which is in some degree similar to ITIL in the sense that it describes what you should do, a set of common practices of stuff you need to manage, a way to work in order to be agile when you develop. But we all know that agile is now moving towards DevOps. So the agile people is also doing the operations side, if you do it right. So the DevOps world is happening, right? And so the developers and software is eating the world that way, right? and so there is a conflict potentially between the classical approach of ITIL and then the DevOps world of SAFe. It can be combined, and ITIL 4 tries to talk about that. But then again, we say, well, the big movement is probably around learning and understanding how to do DevOps via SAFe. And then you still have ITIL running in your existing operations center. How can they merge? And then it's interesting because IT4IT actually underpins all of that, right? It's a reference architecture also for how to set up the systems and data structures and groupings of stuff you need to do in order to do continuous planning, continuous integrations, continuous deployment in an efficient manner in SAFe, right? So it becomes that underpinning of any of these frameworks.
So I know you talked before when we chatted about things like value streams, and that's really the core, I believe, of that reference architecture. How do things flow through plan, build, deliver, and run? But there's also those feedback loops and stuff like that. So can you talk more about the value streams?
Absolutely. So that was one of the innovations we did back in the early work on IT4IT. So almost 10 years ago, we thought, well, we need to think about IT as a business, right? And we thought it's not just a cost center that tries to do the right stuff. It needs to be viewed as a business. So that service provider mindset. And part of that, we thought, well, there are other places in the world where they figured out how to do businesses, right? And manufacturing industry is an example where value stream thinking is very common, and that's kind of where value stream thinking started. And we thought, well, that's actually a good paradigm also for IT. So we introduced the concept of IT really being a value chain. That was the first version of it, and there is a subtle difference between a value network and value streams and value chains. But the book is pretty clear about it if you read them. And so we introduced the IT for IT, the digital for digital value chain in the first release of IT4IT, which is really this concept that you plan, you develop, you deliver, and you run stuff, right? And that needs to be chained together, and each step needs to create value. Now, we've taken it still sounds a bit waterfallish, right? But it isn't. That was not the intent. There's lots of feedback loops in it. But we in the latest version of the standard, which has only yet been released as a snapshot, so it's not formal standard yet. We are in the process of final review to get it wrapped up. But there we have essentially 7 value streams. They are developer-run value streams, if you will, right? So it's in what SAFe refers to as development value streams, essentially. But I don't like to call them development value stream because it's also the run part, right? So I would rather call it.
I'm interested is the run part.
So I would call them DevOps value streams, if you will, right? And there's 7 of them, and they interact, and you would have the integration value stream, the deployment value stream, the release value stream, the operate value stream, and they all work together into a coherent delivery system that if you implement that, you have an efficient and optimized way of getting from an idea, from a plan to something you iterate the heck out of to get to market as an MVP that you can upgrade, that you can present to the customer, that you can also make sure it's actually run and be managed, and you have help desk and all the other common things around it.
And I know, having read some of the documents, and I'm not into it as anything like the depth that you are, but I know there's a great deal of detail behind any one of those value streams and what's supposed to happen when, and what the role of a particular person might be that actually makes an action at a particular point. So there's lots to read into. So it's interesting you mentioned the manufacturing thing, because I know, again, one of the things that Micro Focus talks about and you talk about is this digital factory. Yeah. So now I understand where the word factory comes from in terms of that. That's great.
Right. And some people hate that word in the sense of saying, well, the developers don't want to be considered factory workers, and factory workers is sort of an assembly line, etc. But there is an aspect of forget about whether it's blue or white collar workers and all of this kind of old thinking, is that we need to be much more professional and much more efficient in how we produce software, because there's one thing that is evident, is that we need more and more of it, and it needs to go faster and faster. So we can't have these enormous planning cycles, etc. It needs to just, whenever there's something you need to put through the pipeline, it needs to be efficient in how you do that. And that is what this factory will allow you to do. Right, if you have implemented it, you have the highway to get your ID to market and operate it.
Okay, so we're talking about ITIL and IT4IT. What really comes first? It's almost like a chicken and an egg thing. Where should a customer really start if they're trying to build out this concept of a digital factory?
Right, and obviously it depends on where you're coming from. As you said, the chicken and egg, who comes first? Well, you could say who cares, because it's there is a chicken and there is eggs, right? So so you don't have to worry about it, right? And I would typically see a lot of companies, if they were a traditional company of a decent size, you would have tried to standardize on some operational procedures that aligns to ITIL. But you're not doing it good enough. You're not doing product proper management good enough. You don't have the good links between event and incidents. Change management is not sufficiently standardized, etc. Right? So you could start upgrading that, and that becomes very easily a business process re-engineering stuff. But you could, if you instead flip around and say, well, do I actually have all the right systems in place? Have I consolidated my system so that I have a systems of insight with all the right data objects? So if somebody concentrate on all the events, with this system is where I manage all my change. I have my CMDBs that actually really have a good picture of what is going on. So can I put these systems in place? Then suddenly the rest pops out. Then it's much easier to change your processes. You might actually automate the processes, so you don't even need to think that much about training people to run a new process. It just happens, right? Events gets escalated if they're not being dealt with. Incidents do correlate, then there are problems. They can be fed back to defects, which is something that it was funny to read some of the early ITIL document, ITIL version 2, right? Lots of different boxes, and then there was one box called development, right? Yeah, okay. The safe guys might sort of challenge that a little bit. That is much more complicated over there, and with the speed and agility, you need to really have that connectivity to work, right? Because 10% of the cases, you do need to have a patch coming out, right? And those 10% is very important 10%, because those are the ones that are really hindering your business, right?
So you bring up an important point about the speed that people need to be able to release code and release applications into a business environment. And ITIL's very old, the original ITIL and those concepts. How do you feel that ITIL, and particularly IT4IT, have adapted in terms of that new modernization and cloud environments and very high speed of execution on stuff?
Right. I would say
do they help with that?
Certainly help with that in the IT4IT case. I'm saying, well, as I indicated before, we actually invented the concept of value stream thinking in the digital world, right? And so SAFe has picked it up. Gartner starts talking a lot about it. There are value stream management forums of various sorts. Everybody is thinking about how can I optimize my value streams, right? That's what it's about. It's not about running infrastructure or running apps. It's about optimizing value streams, right? So we're kind of used to that concept in IT4IT. ITIL 4 is also now starting to talk about value stream. But I'm kind of saying it's a little bit me too, right? It's ITIL 4 is now a document being owned and maintained by training institution for the purpose of earning money on training. So yeah, fine, okay, it's reasonable what they're written, right? But it's not where the thought leadership kind of comes from, and it's not a best practice document either necessarily. But you can learn from reading it. So I'm not trashing it either in that sense. At all, right?
And I talk to customers. So a lot of customers are saying, but ITIL is kind of old hat. And I still say that everything that is in ITIL, as you say, probably version 2, is still as relevant today, if not more relevant, when you move to cloud and these high-speed changes than it ever was before when you were in a traditional data center and nothing. You know, I used to go into banks and they would never make any changes on any machine for a period of 6 months. It's like they were frozen. Nothing happened unless it was a high important security patch. Nothing changed. They needed stability, and these days it's a different world that we live in. Sure, for sure.
Right, and but the other thing you also see there in that setting is that you have these DevOps teams that iterate very quickly and you fail fast and you patch forward and these smart things, which is good and great, right? But typically the DevOps teams, if there's something they hate is repetitive tasks, right? So they try to automate everything. That's good as well. But that doesn't change the fact you need to have a help desk, right? There are users that have issues, and occasionally you do a fat finger and something goes really wrong, right? And thousands of the events happens, etc., right? And yes, the DevOps teams needs to be there, but they need to also have these traditional functions in place and be able to interact with them. So you do need to have incident management in a smart manner, right? And I know some DevOps people saying, well, I don't need incident or problem management. You look at the event and then you create defects in development. Yeah, that's fine, but it doesn't scale necessarily.
Right? Yes.
It's very good in the beginning, right? Because you very fastly need to look at the event and then do something about it. But once it's stabilized, DevOps people don't want to be there, right? They want to hand it over to somebody else to run it, right? And ITIL is very good at that.
Okay, so we're kind of getting to the point of wrapping up. So we talked about IT4IT. You've mentioned the open group and how important that is, and the role that Micro Focus and you play a very important role in terms of open group. What should a customer do? How can they get involved with IT4IT? Should they get involved just as an individual, or is it a company thing? Do they become practitioners or contributors? What's kind of the best thing that a lot of people are doing now?
Well, there are many different options. Well, first thing you could work with my company, with Micro Focus. We have a lot of people that knows IT4IT, so I'll be happy to contribute there. But you could. The great thing about the Open Group is it's an open standard. You don't have to pay. You don't pay a fee to get a copy of the standard or the white papers and whatever is associated. You just go to the Open Group webpage and download it. Whatever you need, right? You need to register as a user, but it doesn't cost anything, and you won't be spammed with emails and other things by signing up for that. So don't worry. We are trying to make it more consumable. We are working an interesting project there, so it's easy to click in and get the information, but it's all there, right? If you want to have a glimpse into what is really happening in the next iteration of the standard, you need to become a member. And there is a lot of different membership levels you can get, but it starts pretty low, and you could get member of the IT4IT community, and then you get access to all the work in progress material, and you can be part of actually contributing, either just by listening, reviewing, or if you have good ideas, you can get them on the table and we can discuss it and potentially roll it into the next iteration of the standard.
Right. So again, sounding very open. Yeah,
it's the Open Group.
Hence the name,
right? Yeah, and we have members from all over the world, right? It's a very inclusive group.
Right, and so I assume just like ITIL, you've got certification and things like that individuals might go through as well as they become practitioners.
Absolutely. So there is training institutions that trains in IT4IT, and we actually have some offerings as well in Micro Focus, but it's not our main business to train in IT4IT. But some groups are doing that, and you can get certified as an individual in your knowledge on the standard. So that's also an avenue you can pursue.
Okay, so I'd just like to for the people listening, I just want to kind of wrap up some of the things that we talked about, and then if you could just comment on any of the things that I've said, just correct me if I've missaid them as well. Yeah. So the first thing, so the IT4IT really came out of Open Group. And is supported by over 100 companies. So that's that peer review of those standards, which means it's open, which means that anyone's got access to it, and it's Micro Focus and customers and our other vendors as well, which is great. ITIL is really that best practice document, as I mentioned. I see it as that common sense kind of written down. But IT4IT is that reference architecture that will help you to roll out ITIL as your standard. Yeah. They do coexist, ITIL and IT4IT, but it also links into other areas like that agile development. So how do you actually start to bring in the development side into how you deal with operations, and really gives you that whole framework through the value streams of the whole development and operations, so that DevOps cycle. And then fourthly, I've got that customers can use IT4IT to build this concept of a digital factory. And now at least I know why the word factory is used there. But it's also that end-to-end story of plan, build, deliver, and run. And really I guess for customers to get involved, they need to actually understand where their challenges are and then start to focus on those. And that's something that Micro Focus, but many of the companies could actually help them with. And then finally, really is that it's get involved in Open Group and what's going on there. Become certified, become a practitioner, get your company involved, and actually help to drive that standard and those reference architectures. Make sure it stays open. Yeah. Any final comments from you, Lars?
No.
Did I misrepresent anything?
You certainly listened. So thank you for summarizing very succinct here. The final comment is just to reinforce: get involved. Right. We think it's very important to have reference architectures in our industry because it prevents you from being locked into a single vendor. And of course, we would like you to consume as much as possible of our products, but we really believe in an open, composable way of delivering digital. And we do believe that the IT4IT standard really gives you that optimized factory that where you can accelerate how quickly you can get stuff to market. You can simplify how you operate it. You can also strengthen your cyber posture. So it's part of it is the security aspect is something we are increasingly putting into it. And then it creates a systems of insight and end-to-end view of what is going on. So you actually can balance what you're doing. That goes back to the value stream management to begin with. So it really is what you need, right? You need that optimized digital factory, and it's an open free blueprint for it.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for taking the time out today, Lars. This has been really insightful. I thought I knew some bits about this, but I've certainly even learned some more things as well. And I know we've also both got a passion for things like the service modeling. So in the future, one of the podcasts, I'd like to sit down and chat to you about service modeling as well and how important that is. But thank you very much for this. I think we can wrap this up, and thank you again for taking the time, putting clarity into this very important topic.
My pleasure, and I look forward to talk to you again on service modeling, product versus services, and other interesting aspects.
Right, yes.
That is also part of IT4IT, but a bit more detailed in nature. Yeah, but thank you for taking the time to give me an interview here. I hope some people listening to it will get some good insight and ideas that they can use for something. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Lars.